Senator Roberts, you have the call.
Thank you, Chair. Could you tell me what is clean energy? Just a quick preliminary question before we get into...
Well, ideally, Senator, clean energy is one that doesn't produce emissions.
Emissions of what?
Emissions of carbon dioxide or their equivalent is how we would, I guess, broadly consider clean energy. I mean, it's not a technical term, but in the general parlance.
So what's dirty about carbon dioxide?
Well...
Because you're exhaling it right now.
Yeah, and it's omnipresent around us, and I appreciate that, Senator. But what we're about is trying to decarbonise the Australian economy and the electricity sector and the ag sector and infrastructure and property and so on. So that's what we're about, and part of that is investing in renewables, which are, of course, clean energy.
So there are a few leaps there. We'll ignore the leaps, but if we look around inside this building and outside, everything that we see in here has come from the use of energy. And human progress over the last 170 years has been due entirely to the ever-decreasing cost in real terms of energy, except for the last 25 years, since 1996, where the costs have doubled, in fact, more than doubled. So we're reversing human progress on the basis that carbon dioxide is a dirty gas, correct?
Senator, in fact, power prices during the day in many states of Australia are extremely low today, and in some cases have been negative. So I don't know if that is always the case.
Wholesale prices and consumer prices, especially for families, have increased dramatically in the last 25 years. So let's get on to the Clean Energy Finance's claim. This is a quote: "We invest to lead the market, operating with commercial rigour to address some of Australia's toughest emissions challenges in agriculture, energy generation and storage, infrastructure, property, transport and waste. With $10 billion to invest on behalf of the Australian Government, we work to, I hope that's the people, we work to deliver a positive return for taxpayers across our portfolio." So the Clean Energy Finance Corporation's normalised surplus, what some people might argue is akin to a profit, from operations excluding extenuating circumstances in 2019-20 was $100.5 million, compared with $143.6 million the year before. Isn't that a disappointing decline? And do you expect a recovery?
We're very proud of our economic record, Senator, and the operating surplus that we produced last year we think is a significant achievement. In fact, when you take away from that operating surplus, net operating surplus, the cost of government funding, we still produce a profit for the Australian taxpayer. So I think what we've done, investing successfully across all those sectors that you mentioned, has been a terrific achievement.
So what is the return? I would calculate it as about 1%.
Well, it depends how you look at it, Senator. We're directed by the government to try and achieve a portfolio benchmark return across the whole portfolio. And if you look at our sort of cumulative return through to 31 March of this year, our return is approximately 4.63%. So, I think that's a very positive return.
Okay. Secondly, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation impairment provision at 30th of June 2020 was $121.1 million, compared with $59.7 million in the previous year. So that's a 100% increase, and it represented 5.1% of loans and advances at amortised cost, compared with 2.3% in 2018-19. So it's more than doubled.
Remember, it's a provision, Senator, so it's not a loss or a write-off of any of our assets, and we're pleased to say that we have negligible losses in our portfolio across the course of the 8 years that we've been investing. The increase is a reflection of some of the challenges that we have taken into account in relation to wind and solar projects and the challenges with the grid and marginal loss factors and curtailment. So to be prudent and conservative, we did increase our impairment provision substantially last year. I'll maybe get my CFO to...
Senator, I might also just add that one of the factors that we were considering back in August when we were wrapping up the June financial year end was that everybody was projecting at that point that we were headed into a recession. And if you're headed into a recession, your probability of default on loans will increase. So we prudently put extra money aside to provision for that event. Fortunately, with hindsight now, we did not head into a recession. We're back on the way out, and we're experiencing growth now. So that prudent provision that stood there at that point in time was not needed because we did not suffer actual losses. That was just a provision in case.
So the 5.1% includes the provision or excludes
that was all provision. So it was purely a statistical calculation on the probability of default if we had low electricity prices, we were headed into a recession, and really the property market as well, people were looking at that and saying, we're not quite sure what's going to happen with valuations in property. And so we had to prudently provide for those things, fortunately not required in hindsight.
Okay, thank you. What are your projections for impairment over the next 5 years?
Over the next 5 years, it's actually spelled out in the budget papers, and I can give you that exact number, but effectively we're not projecting an increase dramatically in the provision. So if we look at, I'm on page 166 of the budget papers, and we provide in there on about halfway down the page, write down an impairment of assets. There's, in the budget year, 45 million. Now that's a combination of two things. There's about $20 million of true impairment provision that we allow for, and about 25 million that we're providing in the event that we have to invest at suboptimal rates to provide some stability in the grid. One of the things that's factored in here is the Grid Reliability Fund. We expect that we will have to invest equity in some cases. That equity may be at less than market rates. So instead of a concessional charge, it ends up as an impairment charge. You write it down to the fair value. Now that's to make sure that the grid can cope with the ongoing changes to the generation nature.
So how much on another question, how much have you written off in terms of lost capital and foregone interest?
Over the entire life of the corporation, I think from memory it's like
a couple of 100,000.
Yeah,
I mean,
it may be as high as 800,000. We can take it on
We'll
notice.
take it on
to give
notice.
the exact number.
It's immaterial in the scheme of the scale of the CEFC.
2.5 minutes left in this segment. I'm going to give the call to Senator McAllister.
Okay. Everything that you're putting money into has a subsidy. It can't stand on its own merits. Aren't you lending money out and expecting to get it back?
As we've discussed, all our expected capital has been returned with the expected income. And I'm not sure about your statement there that everything that we've invested in is receiving a subsidy. We're a very broad investor, right from large-scale projects to, as I say, into property, things like the build-to-rent sector and venture capital and clean technologies. And so I'm not sure why you'd think that all the sectors and all the companies and projects we've invested in would be receiving a subsidy.
Senator, I'm Simon Every, Head of Government and Stakeholder Relations. I might be of some assistance there. Under our Act, and this goes to the question you asked earlier about a definition of clean energy technology, the three heads of definition are renewable energy technologies, energy efficiency technologies, and low emissions technologies. And so while, as you point out, renewable energy technologies may have some subsidies, for example, through the renewable energy target, for most of the energy efficiency technologies, there's no subsidy involved. And in fact, over the life of the CEFC, I think we've made about $9.1 billion worth of commitments, and there would only be about $55 million worth of concessional subsidy that the CEFC has itself offered. 55 million odd over 9.1 billion of lifetime commitments is a drop in the bucket.
So, last question, Chair. The Energy Minister, Mr Taylor, has cited publicly the Bloomberg graph on investment per capita in various countries around the world in solar and wind. And Australia has double the per capita investment of any other country. Number 2 country, I think, is America. We're just over double. We're 6 times China's investment in that, even though they make all of our most of our solar panels and wind turbines. So other than providing still further assistance to wind and solar, how does this funding encourage private investment in Australia's renewable energy sector when the evidence suggested that we're already over-investing?
Well,
And bringing quite damaging consequences to us, as we've heard.
yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things in there, Senator. I mean, remember, of course, Australia is a world leader in rooftop solar. So, you know, they're kind of in excess of 2 gigawatts of rooftop solar is installed each year at the moment in this country. So that accounts for some of the, you know, the per capita figures that you cite. In terms of, you know, attracting, you know, the use of the private sector and why isn't that investing? Well, the good thing is that we have been crowding in private sector investment over the course of our life at the CEFC, and for every dollar that we have in fact invested, we have crowded in $2.4 of third-party capital. So part of what we're about is coming into, you know, into projects, you know, supporting companies, and we at the same time are trying to attract in the private sector, be they, you know, Australian banks, international equity, you know, large-scale infrastructure funds, and so on. So we're about bringing in the private sector and, you know, not crowding anyone out.
Thank you, Chair.